Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator with the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. I want to welcome you all today to our webinar titled Leveraging Peer Education and Establishing Naloxone Education in Distribution Programs, featuring our presenters today, Marlaina Widmann and Bryce. Before we get started with today's content, I do just have a few housekeeping slides I'd like to share with everybody. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions at any time throughout the live session for our presenters, but we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We do have the chat enabled, and we would love for folks to use that to share reflections and resources as it relates to today's content. But again, we do kindly ask if you have any specific questions that you utilize the Q&A feature. Additionally, we have live captioning enabled for today's session, and you're able to turn that on through your bottom dashboard. We also encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. Additionally, today's session has been approved for CHES credits. To receive CHES credits, you must have purchased the CHES add-on. You are required to attend the entire live session, and you must complete the evaluation within 2 business days, and the evaluation should open up in your browser as you leave today's webinar. If you have any issues accessing the evaluations, please feel free to reach out to us at the center email address. CHES certificates will be sent out to folks within 30 days, and credits are reported to the board on a quarterly basis. We also have a few upcoming events that I'd like to share with everybody. Our next webinar will be taking place on June 3rd and is titled The Charge for Change, an opportunity to enhance campus hazing and alcohol misuse prevention. Our next water cooler chat will be taking place on June 9th and will be focusing on environmental scanning for impaired road use. And then we will be releasing registration in the coming days for our Recovery Allied Training, Recovery is Spoken Here, Train the Trainer opportunity, and that will be taking place on June 17th. We haven't released registration yet, but we will be doing that in the coming days, so stay tuned. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to our presenters today. Joining us today is Marlaina Widmann, Assistant Director with Trinity University, and joining them is Bryce, Naloxone Education and Distribution Trainer with Trinity University. Thank you both for joining us, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you at this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. We're so excited to be here today with you all. Like Anthony said, my name is Marlaina Widmann, she, her pronouns, and I'm at Trinity University, and I'll be co-presenting with Bryce, one of our peer health educators who leads our Narcan program here. So for our learning outcomes today, we want to help you identify effective approaches to training and mentoring peer educators, identify models for structuring peer education leadership opportunities, understand how peer education can be leveraged to support harm reduction programs, and describe strategies for developing a naloxone education and distribution program at your institution. So to go over what we'll be talking about today, I'll tell you a little bit about Trinity University's program history and overview, and a little bit about some of the training and mentorship strategies that I utilize in our program. And then I'll pass it over to Bryce to go really in depth on what our Narcan program is. And at the end, we will have some time for a Q&A. So our overall goal today is to help you gain practical strategies to leverage peer health educators in your work, including with Narcan programs. So first off, why peer health education? I was hoping you guys could share in the chat how you use peer health education on your campus and what kinds of things you use peer health educators for. So in the fall, it'll actually be my 10 years since I started as a peer health educator when I was an undergrad. And this is my 3rd institution where we've used peer health education. And our programs have looked so different at every institution. So I'd love to know a little bit about how you guys use it. So you have outreach, students can explain it in a way that their fellow students can relate with. Yeah, so a lot of times, I wasn't a student at Trinity, so I don't know exactly what it's like to be a student specifically here. So it's so helpful to get the Trinity student perspective. So we use for 8 dimensions of wellness, for peer education, for resources, open up conversations, workshops, outreach, coaching. Yeah, all of those different things. So there's so many different reasons why different institutions will use peer education. One of those is increasing the capacity of your office. So I started off at Trinity as a one-person office, and so I had very limited capacity for what I was able to do just as one person. And adding peer health educators was so helpful to really be able to build and expand the programs in the office. We can reach different populations with students. So if we have different identities of students who are peer health educators, they can reach some of those different populations. They also know how to reach some of the harder populations because they're students too, and they know what their friends are up to. They can help us promote positive social norms so they can help to show what these wellness things that we're teaching about look like in practice. And they greatly benefit peer health educators. They learn so much being peer health educators. And then we know that peer educators can be effective in improving well-being. Sometimes there's a little bit of mixed literature related to peer educators, but if we make sure that our peer educators are really well trained and we're providing really good resources for them, we know that they can be effective. So just wanted to start off with a little bit of an overview of Trinity University and what it looks like here, just to provide some more context for how we do it. So Trinity University is very small. We have 2,600 students. It's a private institution and liberal arts, and we're a PWI, a primarily white institution, and we're in San Antonio. So I started off working at Trinity University in August of 2022. And so launched our peer education program in that spring of 23. We started off with 6 paid peer health educators, and we also reestablished our Active Minds student organization. It was previously active before COVID, and then during COVID, kind of lost that traction, so we reestablished it. Then that next academic year, we grew and we were able to have 11 paid peer health educators. They established our It's on Us It's on Us student organization focused on sexual violence prevention, while Active Minds focuses on that mental wellness aspect. And we also were able to start our Safer Sex Supply station. So we have about 15 stations located all around campus that has free condoms, internal condoms, external condoms, lube, dental dams, gloves, all of that kind of stuff. And then the following year, we were able to grow again and have 15 paid peer health educators. That's when our Narcan program officially started. It was in the planning stages that previous year, but we were able to officially launch it in fall of 24. We were able to start some different research initiatives. So one of the research things that we did that year was focusing on our queer health needs assessment. We found in the spring of 23 that our queer students, especially gender queer students, experience health disparities in every single measure of the National College Health Assessment. So trying to figure out what can we do within integrated counseling, health, and wellness services to help reduce those health disparities. And then we started with our wellness programming coordinator. So instead of being a one-person office, we officially had 2 people working in our office. And kind of how the things are split with that is our wellness programming coordinator directly oversees the peer health educators now. And then I oversee just a couple of them for a few of the things like the Narcan program. And then this past year, we kind of maintained that level of peer health educators. We found that's like a real good sweet spot for what our institution's looking for. And we also established a new student organization, our Student Wellness Advisory Board. So just some training and mentorship strategies for developing our strong peer health educator program. We have a wellness practicum course that is required for all of our students to go through. It is open to any students who are interested in peer education. A lot of times we encourage people to take the course first before applying to be a peer health educator so they really know what they're getting into. Starting this course was pretty easy because it was a pre-existing course on the course catalog. So I had to just go in and renew it and was able to start it. But if I had to start it from scratch, we would have to go to like our faculty senate and kind of like get it on the curriculum and all that kind of stuff. So lucked out that it already sort of existed and was able to bring that back. I'm using the 2 credit hour version because it seems to fit in better with our students' schedules. And in this course, I teach the basics needed to be an effective peer health educator. So they do go through the NASPA Certified Peer Educator program, so they are able to have that certificate. I go through public health basics, health behavior change theories, health information for each of our 3 main topic areas. We talk about health promotion resources, health education skills like motivational interviewing. And then they actually practice tabling and facilitating workshops and creating health education materials. So they actually have to do some volunteer hours with our program to see what it's like actually putting this into practice. And then we do some recruitment and advertising for this course and use that as a way to kind of gain interest in our wellness services. So this course really helps to provide that foundational knowledge that helps our peer health educators to really kind of go out there and do the peer health education on their own. We also make sure that they receive ongoing training. So we do semesterly PHE retreats, and at those retreats in the fall, typically we go over our kind of like standard procedures and like how do those things work. But we also make sure that we build in professional development within those as well. One semester we focused on queer health because that was kind of like that focus of the research that we were doing. One semester we did Clifton Strengths and dug really into that. And then one semester we went more into sports betting because that was becoming a more talked about topic. We also have team meetings every week in their smaller groups, and they have to read a literature review paper before they go into that team meeting to discuss it. So we're making sure that every single week they're learning something new related to that topic area that they're doing. We also have monthly full team meetings and make sure we do some training there as well. And then some additional opportunities as they pop up, we'll invite them to participate in those. So we want to make sure that not only do they have that good foundation, but they're doing that continuing education. One of the things that I think about a lot when it comes to supervising the students is situational leadership. So different leadership styles for different students or different parts of their journey. So none of these are better or worse than the others. It's more kind of that situation. What does the student need? What does that situation call for? But different levels of supportive behavior as well as different levels of directive behavior. So for example, for the Narcan program, sort of at the beginning, kind of needed a little bit more of the support and directive behavior as we're figuring out what exactly is our Narcan program. But then once we kind of figured it out, Bryce took over and he was able to kind of do things with a lot of autonomy and kind of telling me more of like, what does the program need? And then some mentorship strategies that I think a lot about. With that situational leadership, I try to prep some of those harder topics for the students. So if you know that you're kind of assigning something that's going to be a little bit more specific, making sure that they're really ready for that. For example, with like mental wellness, the students tend to do pretty well with that because they're very familiar with that topic. But when you assign something more specific, like we do a body acceptance week, there's some very specific things that they have to hit for that. So making sure they're guided a little bit more through that process. With the guidance and feedback, I know sometimes people want to kind of let the peer educators kind of take their thing and do their thing and let them have full autonomy on that. But sometimes they need a little bit more of the guidance and feedback with it, and people can be hesitant to give that. But how I approach it is that both of us want the programs to be very effective. And sometimes I have a little bit more insight on some of the strategies that we can use to make it more effective. And the students tend to be pretty open to that because they don't know about some of these topics. They don't know about some of these strategies and they want to know so they can make it as effective as possible. And then one of the things that I like to do is channel a feedback role model. So I had a professor when I was an undergrad who, anytime someone asked a question, she was so receptive to it. Sometimes, like, I'd kind of be like, "What was that question? That was a strange question to ask in this class." But she would respond so well. And so I think about kind of like how she made everyone feel accepted with that. And so I channel her sometimes, especially in like workshops when the students that I'm not really familiar with, just to make sure everybody feels like they have a good experience. I also like to tailor the opportunities to their strengths. We can kind of customize these things a little bit. So Bryce was really passionate about Narcan, and so this kind of made a lot of sense for him to step into this role. I have students who really enjoy public speaking, so whenever we get workshop requests, it's super easy to plug them into those areas. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the different leadership roles. But when we're assigning leadership roles, we think about the different strengths that the students have. Also thinking about how can you build their confidence and self-efficacy, so different strategies with that. So kind of like slowly giving them more autonomy, giving them more room to grow. And then also soliciting feedback. So every semester we send out a feedback form to our peer health educators. We're still kind of in the beginning of the peer health educator journey, right? It's only been around for less than 4 years. So making sure that we continue to adjust and grow in those different areas. So the way that we structure different leadership opportunities for our peer health educators, we want to make sure they have those different rooms to grow, but also that it's of interest to the student. So we have two main areas for the peer health educators. They work about 7 to 10 hours per week, kind of depending on the student, and they spend about 2/3 of their time with their topic area teams. We did this starting 2 years ago, splitting them into topic area teams because the team grew so large. It didn't make sense to try to get 15 people together to try to plan one thing. So we split them into 3 areas. And then about 1/3 of their time they spend with their leadership position, which I'll go over in a few minutes. But for the topic area teams, we have our three main topic areas, which a lot of universities have these, but we focus on sexual respect, mental wellness, and alcohol and other drug safety. You might notice with the sexual respect, we choose that wording versus the sexual violence prevention and the mental wellness versus like mental illness, just to think about more of the salutogenesis side of things. So instead of pathogenesis and how do we prevent bad things from happening, we don't want to just prevent sexual violence, but we want to make sure that they're actually having good sexual relationships. So trying to kind of do both of those things. And then with the teams, they plan all of our Wellness Wednesdays. So every Wednesday, we have a small tabling event and we rotate through those three different topic areas. So the mental wellness, sexual respect, alcohol, and other drug safety. And they get the autonomy to choose kind of what subset of the areas do they want to dig a little bit deeper into. And then sometimes they'll help out with some of our bigger events as well. When it comes to kind of like what opportunities they have within that, we give them a set of learning objectives to choose from just because we want to make sure that we're focusing on a more narrow set of things. So we're repetitively going over this versus just a one-time event on this one thing. We want to make sure that we're building on the student's knowledge base. With the leadership, we have rotating team leads, so everyone gets an opportunity to lead different things. And then their supervisor gives some general guidelines. They have weekly meetings where they all meet, and they do have a budget. And so 350 doesn't sound like a lot, but they're able to do some fun things with that budget. And we want them to be creative with the activities that they're doing, the Instagram posts that they're creating to go along with it, and like the infographics they're creating. So that's kind of what they spend 2/3 of their time in. The other third of their time is spent with their leadership position. So just to give you an example of what the Narcan program looks like right now, Bryce will be kind of going through the history of how it got to this point. But in this moment, what it looks like is Bryce presents our overdose prevention and response trainings. He distributes Narcan to students and student organizations. He fills our Narcan dispensers, tracks our inventory and usage, evaluates our program effectiveness, and then advocates for changes to the program to help grow it. And then what I kind of do to with that is I meet with him weekly. So we have about 15 to 30-minute meetings every week to chat through what's going well, any changes that we need. I help him with scheduling the overdose prevention response trainings and kind of like finding different places where we can also present those. So we had a partnership with the library and trained all their staff, which was really awesome this semester. Also helping with the resources and materials. So making sure that we have enough Narcan in stock and ordering more if needed, which we do get for free through a partner. And then also helping with some of those strategic changes. So that's just one of our leadership positions. The other ones that exist is our student organization presidents and vice presidents are actually paid positions. So that helps us to make sure that there's stable leadership throughout the years with those student orgs. And then we have that research chair that I mentioned earlier. We have a few students helping us with our social media and marketing. So all our Instagram posts, planning those, helping to create them, helping to do our paper marketing. And then we have our safer sex supply station chairs who help to refill our safer sex supply stations, but also tell us kind of like what do students want to see in this. We have internal communications who help to make sure that we're all communicating amongst each other and everybody knows exactly what's going on within all the different things going on within wellness services. And then we have someone helping with our data and evaluation. So those are the leadership positions that we have. So now that you kind of learned a little bit more about Trinity's program, how it works at Trinity, I'm going to pass it over to Bryce to dig into kind of like why Narcan, how it works, kind of like the process of implementing it. So, all right, pass it over to Bryce.
Awesome. Thank you, Marlaina. My name is Bryce. I'm a senior at Trinity University, and I am the Naloxone Education and Distribution Chair within our Wellness Services program. One thing I want to talk about before I talk about kind of how we started our Naloxone program and the process of that, just want to get into like naloxone in and of itself and its value not only in society, but particularly on college campuses. Studies have shown that drug misuse rates are the highest among college students compared to any other demographic. And a lot of this is driven by how the college experience is conceptualized, seen as a time of exploration and experimentation with different substances. What's really troubling about this particularly is that of the substances that are commonly misused, a significant proportion of those have been shown to be not from prescribed sources. And so with stimulants, we see 59%, sedatives 58%, and opioids 52% of these are coming from non-prescription sources. And this is really what's troubling because one of the hallmarks of the danger that has been seen with the fentanyl epidemic is the increasing flux of fentanyl and other highly potent synthetic opioids into non-opioid drugs. And so this proposes a very serious risk to a lot of college students who might not realize that they are being exposed to opioids and synthetic opioids, particularly that are very, very potent and have the potential to very easily cause opioid overdoses. And then this is just further highlighted by a little bit older of a study, but it found that 6.5% of university students reported witnessing an overdose within the past year. And so just really highlighting the amount of students that are not only potentially exposed or coming into contact with these dangerous substances, but the ability of naloxone to impact really a very large number of students on college campuses. Yes, and so as we think about how do we introduce naloxone distribution programs, this is really emphasizing kind of a harm reduction approach to handling this growing issue of the fentanyl epidemic and the opioid epidemic that has been very ongoing. And so I just want to take a minute to kind of acknowledge both prevention approaches and harm reduction approaches and kind of their interplay and the role that both have. Prevention approaches really emphasizing taking away the ability to use these substances, acknowledging that, it's really hard to overdose on a substance if you are not using that substance to begin with. Um, versus, expanding naloxone distribution programs, which is really taking that harm reduction lens. And so just some of the reasoning behind that, not to completely discredit prevention programs, but to kind of elevate harm reduction programs and the role that they play, is that abstinence-based programs really struggle at changing existing behaviors, people who are already engaging with substance use. And they've also routinely been shown to be ineffective at targeting people who are already engaging in these behaviors. They kind of alienate them and present these materials and resources that are not for people already engaging in these behaviors. And so by embracing a harm reduction approach, focusing more downstream on kind of relinquishing, we don't have control over what students may or may not choose to do, but regardless, we're going to give them the tools and resources they need to promote their wellness and stay safe, is really what we're trying to do with naloxone distribution. And so now I'm going to talk, kind of go through the stages of developing a naloxone program at your campus, going specifically through how we did it at Trinity, but also getting more broader advice that could fit many different universities. So the first step, of course, is just getting started and finding that motivation to do it. And so for us, just coming from a quote, "Tragedy is a tool for the living to gain wisdom," coming from JFK, which is more or less fitting. In the second semester of my freshman year, I had a close friend who overdosed. During that time, opioids were never something that anyone around me was intentionally seeking out or using, but ultimately that wasn't what mattered, right? My friend took what was thought to be a Xanax, a benzodiazepine, and contained a potentially lethal amount of fentanyl in it. And so as I reflected on this very difficult experience, I just realized that it wasn't unique, right? If you look at the overdoses caused by all different types of substances, all different classes, we see that the majority of these overdoses are implicated in the use of synthetic opioids as well. And benzodiazepines particularly, we see 71% of overdose deaths with benzodiazepines are implicated in synthetic opioids, really just highlighting the pervasiveness of the fentanyl epidemic and the influx of these synthetic opioids into all different types of substances. And so something that students can do, whether you're in my position or you're an administrator who just wants to see change happen, is always submitting proposals. That was something that I found to be very effective and something that I've seen work a number of times. And so it was an avenue that I explored with this situation. Some things that make a strong student proposal, or even a proposal from a higher up administrator or someone who works at a university. One is evidence of an issue, using articles, research, statistics, anything that can support your cause and give it a sense of credibility. The next thing that I found to be particularly helpful at my university was personal anecdotes. I think that universities particularly, there's so many different types and such a broad range. It's easy for a university to say that this statistic wouldn't apply to us, right? We're a small university, we're a rural university, we're a religious university. These statistics aren't our case. But I think personal anecdotes can do a good job of bringing that evidence to your university. Also, audience targeting. I think who you reach out to is very important. Finding the people who have the power to actually make the programs that you want to see be made. And also clear and realistic action items. Part of this proposal was to get naloxone on our campus, but another part was to gain access to fentanyl testing strips for students. We live in Texas, Trinity University, and so that's one of the 4 states where testing strips are illegal. And so, not a super realistic action item, maybe not the best use of energy, but yeah. So in November 2023, I submitted a proposal that requested increased access to free naloxone for students and a way to be trained on how to recognize and respond to opioid overdoses. And this was sent to the Dean of Students, the Executive Director of Integrated Counseling, Health and Wellness Services, the Director of Wellness Services, and the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Student Affairs. So as I talk about how we prepared this program and started it, there's three features of success that I want to highlight that I'm just going to continually talk about. One is a student-centered approach, which was really important for the success of this program. Two was administrative action and kind of the interplay between students and administration in building and supporting this program. And three is gradual scaling, just recognizing that where you're at today can always improve and looking for those improvements to gradually make these programs better and better. So step two, after you've submitted your proposal and gotten the ball rolling, the second thing that campuses need to do is to evaluate their need. And so the best way to do this is to look at the data that your university has about your student body. Many universities do things like the National College Health Assessment data or the Healthy Mind Study. These have substance use and alcohol and other drug use specific data in them, which can be used to kind of evaluate student risk factors and different things that you might want to focus on. If you don't use these larger national studies, your university might collect internal data or have your own measures about your student body, which can be very helpful as you plan your approach. And then even if you don't have either of these national or internal studies, at the very minimum, you can access national NCHA data and kind of stratify that data to meet universities similar to your university and see what campuses with similar demographics might be dealing with to kind of gain a little bit more knowledge about your campus. And so thinking about Trinity specifically, Marlaina touched on this a little bit, but we're a unique university. We're a very small private liberal arts school. Not that many students, around 2,600 students. And then also we're in San Antonio, Texas. And so the location piece was really important for how we planned our approach. For most people, I would recommend the use or exploring testing strips as an avenue to also mitigate this risk, but that wasn't an option in Texas. So we stuck to a naloxone distribution program. And then looking at the data that we had about Trinity, we had actually just participated in the NCHA right before kind of starting up this program. We knew that around half of our students had never used cannabis in any form. 92% of our students had never used a prescription in a stimulant in a non-prescribed way. And less than 2% of our students reported intentionally using opioids in a non-medical way. So from this data, we had really two takeaways, was that one, the majority of our students weren't at high risk from suffering from the effects of the fentanyl or opioid epidemic. But we also acknowledged that there were students who were at risk. And these students were students that we really wanted to tailor a program for and make sure that we could keep them safe and promote their wellness in this time. And so step three, after you've kind of started getting it rolling, evaluated your campus need, is to now plan your approach in the program that you're specifically going to implement. There's a lot of things that you can consider as you go about planning this approach. One of the ones that is very common is to evaluate the approaches of other universities, learn from the mistakes and the successes of people before you. This is a great way to kind of already know from the jump what works and what doesn't work. And picking an approach that makes sense for your campus, right? Not all campuses are the same. Not all campuses, especially when we think about regulations, are the same. And so the approach that you pick might be very different from the approach that I'm describing here today. And considering these are important. Additionally, including students as you plan out these programs is very important. Students know what students want and they know what students need. And they know how to get it to students and communicate it in a way that students will accept these programs. And I think not including students in the planning of these programs really limits the ability for them to be fully embraced and received by a campus. Also including campus partners and knowing where you're going to get the materials. This is a multi-part process. And so having all of these steps planned out is very helpful. And also knowing who else needs to be involved, who will do the training, pass out materials, etc. All the manpower pieces to this project of how do we actually get it going and who's going to be working on these different pieces. And lastly, consider state legality. Just something that I'm going to continue to come back to. I think that it would be incredible for every university not in one of the 4 states where testing strips are illegal to also build this into kind of a fentanyl and opioid epidemic response plan on top of naloxone distribution. So yeah, very important to consider as you plan your approach. At Trinity, this planning stage took the form of the Alcohol and Other Drugs Task Force. So in response to the proposal that I submitted, Trinity formed this team. It was made up of several students, including myself and the director of wellness services, Marlaina, who's with us today. And this task force met weekly during an entire semester. And during these weekly meetings, we met with experts on both a national and a local scale, gaining information from their insight. We reviewed literature about where the fentanyl epidemic was, where it's going, and best practices, and also assessed their campus need through different forms of data that we had available in order to really plan out the approach that we were going to take. Two of the voices that I want to highlight in our expert opinions are one, Dylan Dunn, who works at Safe Project and is the Senior Director of Safe Campuses, which is one of the divisions of Safe Project. Safe Project is a national nonprofit dedicated to fighting the addiction epidemic, and their Safe Campuses subsection specifically focuses on recovery and harm reduction on college campuses. So Dylan played a very valuable role in kind of educating us on what colleges were doing all across the nation, what the best practices were, what literature was saying we should do, and really innovative approaches that we could take, which is really helpful from that national lens. Secondly, I want to point out Dr. Alfred Montoya, who is actually a sociologist researcher at Trinity University. And he's dedicated his entire career to studying harm reduction approaches. Dr. Montoya was really important because he was very connected in San Antonio on a harm reduction lens. And so he could connect us with the programs and the people that would be important to get this project rolling locally. And so both the national and local perspectives were very important. And so when we think about the program that we actually ended up planning out and implementing, we also had to consider our campus partners who had various concerns about the downstream effects of naloxone distribution. The 2 biggest ones were preventing unintentional fear mongering, where now we're giving out naloxone to students. How do we prevent students from perceiving this as there's a much larger issue with the fentanyl epidemic than there really is, that they might come into contact with fentanyl just by stepping outside their dorms? And the second issue was how do we avoid unintentional negative social norms surrounding opioid use, where students perceive the expansion of naloxone and opioid overdose prevention materials as possibly an acknowledgement that opioid use at Trinity University is a much broader issue than it really is. And so in order to balance these 2 concerns, we really took an education first approach. And that saw the creation of our opioid overdose prevention and response training, which served as a necessary first step for all students who wanted to receive naloxone. And so they were required to go to this training, which kind of balanced any of this misinformation. Okay, so now that you have evaluated your campus need and planned your approach, the next step is to actually implement this thing that you've planned. And so at Trinity, we took this education first approach with our training. We had 4 pieces. So 1, talking about the opioid and fentanyl epidemic and giving us a background into that. Going over harm reduction strategies, much broader than just naloxone use, but things that students could use in everyday life to even prevent opioid overdoses from ever happening in the first place. And then we move more specifically into how to recognize an opioid overdose, going over the signs and symptoms of this event, and how to respond to an opioid overdose with the use of naloxone, calling 911, giving rescue breathing, all the important steps. The training itself is about 45 minutes, and it's given at Trinity University 3 times each semester. So these trainings are publicized through all of our different accounts that Wellness Services has, and given to students, where any student is welcome to come. They're done in collaboration with Wellness Services and a student organization called the Addiction Awareness Association. And all trainings are carried out by trained members of Wellness Services staff. Usually it's going to be the Naloxone Education and Distribution Chair, which is the position that I occupy. And yeah, in this way, we really see an emphasis on the student-centered approach and that administrative support working together to build these trainings into a part of the campus culture. We also acknowledged when we were creating this program that there are some students who are just going to be at a greater risk of experiencing an opioid overdose due to different risk factors. And so one of these student populations that we identified was students in Greek life. And so as we tried to focus this program on Greek life students, we did this in 2 ways. One, we built the opioid overdose prevention and response training into the required curriculum for new Greek life members during their orientation season. So every new member entering a fraternity or sorority was required to go to this opioid overdose prevention and response training, learn how to recognize and respond to an overdose, and also potentially receive naloxone if they wanted it. We also created organization order forms. And so typically what our program would look like is that individual students could come to the training and then request naloxone for themselves. With our organization order forms, a student from any organization of a Greek life org or really any org at Trinity could come to a training and then request a bulk order of naloxone to be distributed or handled amongst their organization. And so this allowed access to, for many students, to naloxone within these organizations. All right, and then step 5 after your program is implemented is just to evaluate the effectiveness and adjust, really emphasizing that third key point that I talked about way back when I started of gradual scaling, kind of always looking for how this program can improve and be better and better. So first, I want to talk about kind of our initial naloxone roadmap. How we thought that students would go about getting naloxone when we first started this program and how that's changed. So initially, we conceptualized that students would attend the training, get a link to go into a naloxone Canvas page. In that Canvas page, they would pass an overdose response skills quiz. And then once they passed the quiz, they could complete a naloxone order form and then pick up their naloxone from health services. In total, this would take about a week for a student to initially attend a training and then finally receive the naloxone, which is just way too much time passing between those 2 events. And kind of the downstream effect of this was a large attrition in our student participants who were coming interested in receiving naloxone and ultimately not receiving it. We saw that 16% of our students who willingly attended our trainings and at one point wanted to receive naloxone ultimately did not go through all the steps to receive the naloxone at the end, which was a very high number, that the majority of students were not ultimately receiving naloxone. We also saw that our training availability was an issue, where our training served as a necessary step and kind of a blockade for students who were interested in getting naloxone, but they were only offered in person 3 times a semester. And so these were 2 areas that we really wanted to target. Our first approach was improvements to access to trainings. We reached out to organization leaders and allowed them to schedule their own organization-specific overdose prevention and response training. And so this allowed the timing of the trainings to be brought to different student populations, allowing increased access to the trainings and thus increased access to naloxone itself at Trinity. And then lastly, we restructured the way that our trainings take place so that our required quiz, which was important for meeting the concerns of university partners, was able to be done at the same time as our training. And so students were able to attend a training and leave the training with naloxone, effectively dropping that attrition rate from like the staggering 84% to 0%, which was huge in actually being able to get naloxone in the hands of students who need it. And lastly, and really what I'm most excited about, which happened this last semester, we acknowledged that requiring students to go to this training presented a large barrier to access to naloxone, where one, the training just takes up time, but two, it could just be something that students don't want to do, for all the reasons that students don't want to engage with trainings of this sort. With the help of Safe Project, we were able to purchase this distribution box, which we put in our library. And this allowed students to just come by and pick up naloxone as needed, really being able to bypass the training part. And this was associated with a huge increase in naloxone distribution on our campus, which was really exciting. And so now I'm just going to talk really briefly about some project impacts and takeaways. So in total, we saw 286 students attend our naloxone trainings, which represents around 11.4% of our student body over the last 2 years. For our orders, we saw 54 of the students make individual student orders for naloxone, whereas 18 student organizations made orders. And so each student organization order can be up to 10 times the amount of an individual order. So it was really interesting how we see these student organizations representing the majority of our naloxone being distributed directly to students. And it was really interesting that these student organizations are really serving as a unique medium by which we're able to distribute naloxone to a vast number of students. Also, once we changed our medium of distribution to this open distribution model, we saw a large increase in the total naloxone that we were giving out, which can be seen in this bar graph with the spring semester of 26 being the first semester of open distribution. And so really emphasizing, one, the magnitude of barrier that it was to require students to come to this training, and also how many students are really interested in receiving naloxone, as we've been able to give out hundreds and hundreds of doses of naloxone just this semester alone. And so we also wanted to kind of assess our training effectiveness at teaching students both how to effectively respond to an opioid overdose and their internal attitudes about the use of naloxone. And so we used a validated scale from Basco et al. 2022. It's a Likert scale, and so lower scores on the scale indicate more positive responses. And we did this before and after students attended the training. What we saw is that the attitude subscale, which is kind of how students conceptualize naloxone in daily life, we see a much improved, a significantly more positive outlook on naloxone after the training. We also see a significantly better confidence in students' self-confidence in responding to an opioid overdose, which was very positive and exactly what we wanted to see. And then lastly, I'm just going to go through some conclusions with our naloxone distribution program. So one, naloxone is a great medical tool. It's an opioid antagonist to reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. Two, due to the fentanyl epidemic and the increased substance use rates that are exhibited with college students, they really see themselves at an elevated risk for opioid overdoses. And so the embracing of naloxone distribution at a collegiate level is a very impactful harm reduction tactic that can be used to reduce the risk of these opioid overdose deaths among college students. And lastly, training programs prevent an effective means of increasing education for students, changing their attitudes towards naloxone in daily life, and increasing their self-confidence in responding to an opioid overdose.
Awesome. So thank you, Bryce. I just want to kind of like add on to some of those conclusions. This wouldn't have been possible for me to do by myself. Bryce really led this. We had a couple other students who were involved in the development as well. But for me, I committed to that like 1 hour meeting per week in that development stage. And then now it's that 30-minute check-in once a week. And so Bryce is really doing kind of like that bulk of the work there. So that's kind of how we were able to be able to have this is through our peer health educators as well as some of our other services too. Before we do Q&A, I wanted to make sure you guys have access to our contact information. This is my personal email here. I'm actually leaving Trinity next week, so feel free to reach out to my personal email or contact me on LinkedIn. And then Bryce has his contact there. But I'm going to end the screen sharing so I can see our Q&A.
Well, thank you both so much for your willingness to share of yourself and your expertise. I can go ahead and field the questions to you both, and you can go ahead and answer how you'd like. Maybe if you don't mind sharing that contact slide again. We have had just a few folks are interested in the slides, and we've encouraged them to reach out with you for any follow-up questions and materials. To get to questions, our first question that came in is, how did peer health educators get certified to teach other students how to identify an opioid overdose and administer naloxone? Was there a specific train the trainer course that they took?
Yeah, so we had Bryce come in to kind of like show our other peer health educators the workshop that we had, and then kind of like answered any questions about that. And then also in that academic course that they have to take, we talk about workshop presentation, more general strategies related to that. And then I also teach some of the kind of background content information related to it. So it's kind of a combination of both of those two things. But for Bryce to get certified, I mean, he kind of helped create the thing, and then we also did a lot of like background education on it first too.
Excellent, thank you. I kind of to follow up on that, how long was the in-person training, and did you all offer a virtual offering as well?
So we did
The in-person training, for the length of the training, it's about 45 minutes to an hour. How many people?
we did do it virtually one time when we were partnering with Fraternity and Sorority Life, but the other ones that Bryce and our other peer health educators did were all in person.
In terms of funding the naloxone, is it university university funded, or is it grant funded?
So we get it for free from UT. They have a grant in San Antonio. And so we go to their website order form and order it there. And then since we've expanded and added in our big box, we actually have to reach them directly to order larger quantities. But that's one of the things that we actually met with Safe Campus to do is sometimes they have some contacts across like the US and they can kind of point you into some of those directions to help find those resources. But we have spent a total of $0 on our Narcan program because the Narcan's free. Bryce was able to receive funding from Safe Project to purchase the distribution box. We've only had to spend funds on the peer health educator paid hours.
Thank you. Did you need any type of standing order from the physicians to place the Narcan distribution box on campus?
Nope, we did not. So my boss is our campus physician. Um, so I just needed her approval because she's my boss. But we didn't need anything from a physician to be able to do that.
Awesome. And this individual asks, how on earth did you get student engagement around attending your training, assuming it was in person? So what were some tips that you helped foster engagement from the students taking the initial training?
Yeah, Bryce, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think so. One thing that I want to point out is that the training itself, I think, is what we've seen this semester, where we've embraced this open distribution model, actually presented a large barrier to entry because kind of what the question is hinting at, right, is students don't want to go to these trainings. And it's really hard to get them to engage with it just from that initial point of how do I get them to go, which was a challenge and still is a challenge. Once they're actually at the training itself is very interactive. There's lots of different points for discussion, talking about our own experiences and kind of what we've seen. And so I think that the training experience itself is highly engaged just due to the nature of it. But yeah, it is still kind of a struggle getting students to engage with it initially and just come to the training.
Yeah, I would say the couple things to add on that we've seen more people go to workshops is when Bryce has done it in collaboration with his student organization. So when the Addiction Awareness Association has hosted a meeting and Bryce has come to that meeting. Bryce is also the president of that org, but whenever he's hosted the training within the meeting where there's already people attending that one, and then also we partnered with the library to train all of their student workers. So that was more of like a mandatory kind of thing for them. And we also were able to make it mandatory 1 year for all of our new fraternity and sorority members. So when we kind of partnered with other people, we've had a lot more attendees versus when we've hosted it, just kind of like an open invitation.
Excellent. I think we have time for just one more question. How did you balance standardization, like consistency of messaging, while allowing peer educators to, show up authentically?
Yeah, I think that kind of comes down to like the training that the peer health educators receive. So they do have a lot of that education with the class and then kind of like that regular education. We also mostly like have Bryce doing this. So we've had different chairs each year, but kind of like the chair tends to be very well educated and do kind of some additional self-education for them as well. So that's kind of what I was thinking about with that situational leadership model. So putting the students kind of like in those right opportunities. But yeah, all of our students receive generic kind of training, more general, and then the Narcan distribution chair goes a lot more in depth on some of those things.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both so much, for sharing of your work and your expertise and for sharing your contact information and your willingness to connect with our learners. I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides that I'd like to share with everybody before we conclude. Again, we have our next free webinar taking place on June 3rd, and we'll be focused on the charge for change and opportunity to enhance campus hazing and alcohol misuse prevention. Our next water cooler chat will be taking place on June 9th, and we'll be focusing on environmental scanning for impaired road use. And then we'll be launching our registration for our Recovery Allied Training Recovery is Spoken Here, Train the Trainer opportunity in the coming days. So we ask that you stay tuned for that promotion. Additionally, today's session has been recorded, and you can expect to see the recording uploaded to our website within 5 business days. Again, if you are trying to receive CHES credits for today's session, again, you must have attended the entire live session, and please complete the evaluation that opens in your browser as you leave today's session. Again, if you have any issues, please feel free to reach out to us at hecaod@osu.edu. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, all.